All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Melissa. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm with the Community Foundation of South Puget Sound. I'm excited to have you here. This is going to be the Moving Beyond Curated Storytelling part 2. This is kind of a follow-up to the first one. Okay, well, mostly a follow-up to the first session. But even if you did not attend the first session, but maybe you watched it online, still more than welcome to be here. I'm going to have Daisha jump in and just do a little bit of explaining of like who the Community Foundation is and why we wanted you here.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. So my name's Daisha Versailles, she, her pronouns, and I work with Melissa over at the Community Foundation with our programs, and that includes grant making and scholarships and Give Local, which is what this workshop is kind of loosely related to, although storytelling is something that certainly happens year round. And one of the things, so the Community Foundation does a lot of things, but I think specifically related to you all who are here today is we really strive to be a local funder that really supports a broad range of organizations that are all contributing to the individual and community health and well-being in so many different ways, things that matter to us in our community and all of the different people who come together to make sure that those things get taken care of. And Give Local is really one of our most open community-based programs where people get to bring their own style of storytelling, come together, support giving and generosity as a whole, and then all of the ways that that keeps your work going throughout the year. So we're really excited to have Elaine here with Window Seat Media to just work with us on some storytelling things, because I think that's one of the most important ways, honestly, that you can connect with new donors, that you can connect with old donors, that you can connect with funders and community supporters, volunteers in so many ways, is bringing people into your story. So I'm actually not going to say anymore, but we'll hand it over to Melissa. Is there more housekeeping, or just back to Elaine to introduce herself? And
yeah, just a couple other housekeeping.
Okay. All right. So I'll hand it back to Melissa, and Melissa can pass it to Elaine. Thank you all for being here.
All right. We're going to play a little hot potato. So thanks, Daisha. And I'm just going to go ahead and let you all know that, yeah, there's just a couple of housekeeping things. So first off, we are recording this session. So that way folks who maybe couldn't attend today or didn't realize that this was even happening and want to watch it for, in the future and stuff like that, they can go ahead and do that. We also have, there is some live transcripts, little subtitles on the bottom of, should be showing up on the bottom of your screen if you need those. If you don't want them, if they're like too distracting for you, you should underneath there should be an option that says either live transcript or like subtitle settings. And then from there, you should be able to turn those off. And additionally, we will be sending out these recordings and any materials that are presented today, so that way you can have them to refer back to later. So that way, you're like, oh my God, I don't think I wrote this down and I really knew it was important, but I forgot already. So yeah, you'll be able to get all those. And just two other things is that one, we have a couple other workshops coming up. One of them is it's on building a comprehensive marketing strategy and some online presence for your organization. That's going to be held on September 30th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. and is being presented by Three Girls Media. And then the next session is we're going to have on October 6th. I'm going to be doing another live walkthrough on how to use the Give Local platform. So if you're registered for Give Local, or if you haven't registered and still would like to register and participate, you have time to do that. Registration closes October 1st. And we'll go ahead and I will just kind of walk you through a little bit of how to start the basics, how to make sure that you can get your organization set up and ready for success. And we're also going to have our last workshop of this year is on October 12th. And that is actually going to be hosted by Daisha. And she's going to be talking to you all about a workshop called Fundraising for Humans, talking a little bit about how to keep the humanity in our fundraising effort. So that way we're not just being like, oh, well, you should give us money because we're doing cool things. And yes, that's very true. But we got to make sure that, you know, we're building those relationships as well. So that way we can keep them long term. And yeah, the other thing is kind of what I tied into earlier was there is still time. If you're not registered for Give Local, you can still do that all the way up until October 1st. I'll put the links to those workshops and also for the registration in the chat box. And with that, that's about all I have for housekeeping. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Elaine to introduce herself. And thank you so much for coming, Elaine.
Thanks, Melissa and Daisha. It's great to see you all. Thanks for spending the morning together. I appreciate it. I think some of you attended. Actually, if you could just kind of raise your hand and let me know, were you at the last, who was at the last workshop, the part 1? And so it looks like Allison and Judy. And anybody watched it online? The recording? Okay, so we have a couple new folks. Great. So I'll just introduce myself a little bit just as a refresher about who I am. So I live here in Olympia. I run a small nonprofit called Window Seat Media. And the bulk of what we do really at Window Seat Media is about facilitating community oral history projects, where we explore a theme or a topic, and I train community members in oral history interviewing, and we create a variety of ways to engage with stories in our community through that process. And so my background really is as an oral historian. I have a graduate degree in folklore, which kind of broadens our understanding of story beyond kind of verbally transmitted stories, but the way we tell stories through food, for example, or dances, or the music that we play, the rituals that we participate in. So all of these ways that we connect with each other in community is a way that we tell stories. And so that's kind of my broad background, and I've sort of brought that and integrated that into my work in nonprofits, and thinking about how I can apply some of the learning and principles that I've learned through my graduate training into sort of nonprofit storytelling. So I've worked as a development director for, I guess, I don't know, 8-10 years here in town at the Dispute Resolution Center and the Film Society. So I have sort of this background in nonprofit fundraising and marketing, and thinking about, just how to apply those principles from my graduate training into the nonprofit sector. So, and I've taught some of these ideas too at the Evergreen State College in their MPA program. So that's a little bit about who I am. And so this is part 2 of it's the second part of a 2-part workshop. And the first part, we were really kind of focusing on some principles and ideas. I offered sort of a template that you could try for your Give Local workshop or Give Local campaigns. And so this workshop is really about bringing some of your sort of works in progress to the table so we could share and give feedback together as a group. Not knowing who is necessarily going to show up and what people would bring, we're going to be a little bit flexible and fluid with how we move together and be a little informal together moving forward. But I thought we would start, what I'd love to do is start with just a little round robin. If everybody wants to just introduce themselves, the organization they're with, and just a little bit about the progress that you're making towards your Give Local campaign, particularly the storytelling aspect of it, and maybe what you're hoping to get from our session together today. Does anybody want to get started? Judy, go ahead. Judy, I can't hear you. Is anybody else having?
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm on the phone as well. That's my audio, and you can see my face. So I'm in 2 parts. But Thank you. I'm Judy Jones. I'm the Development Director of the Thurston County Food Bank. Give Local, our theme, our overarching theme this year is a community committed, and it's finishing that sentence in different ways. So a community committed to feeding those in need, a community committed to compassion, a community committed to, I have lots of different ways to finish that statement, but I think that one resonates so far with me, and Allison works with me, and so we've been kind of bouncing ideas off each other, and when I come up with stuff, I sort of pitch it her way, but this one seems to be sticking. It's like, is the pasta ready? It sticks on the wall, and so this one is sticking. I would say last year we focused on, it was less about the pandemic and more about how we came together as a community, and that's, I continue to want to focus on the community and the strength of the community and the participation and coordination of our efforts together. That just, to me, that is the most powerful piece that I take with me as we continue to work through all of this. I have some story ideas. I don't know if they'll work in here or not. I mean, I think they could. And just looking forward to getting more. I've got all my notes from last time, just looking at ways to be able to take what I'm getting out of these workshops and trainings, which is a lot, and really trying to create some effective narratives that work on the platform. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Who would like to share next? Megan?
Go next. My name is Megan Sullivan. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director of Together. And I can't remember, to be honest with you, if I did make that first training or not. I have been to a number of trainings, and I really appreciate all the trainings that the Community Foundation has been putting on. I think what happened is there was a date change, and I don't think that the next one made it to my radar and calendar. So I apologize for that. But I am going to go back and watch it. And for Give Local, we are, of course, registered and have been a participant for several years. We have our program area selected that the funds will benefit. We run 3 main programs, and one is new in the last year, started with seed money from the Community Foundation called Host Homes. And so we're excited to introduce that concept to the community, but it's not a program that's been operational in our county before. So it's not a program that we've told stories about from real participants and clients. We do have partnerships with folks in Mason County that have told their story. And so I think there's a way that we can use real stories, but certainly some of our other programs. So in summary, it is to house unaccompanied minors in a short homestay-like exchange student program, essentially. And it's not as involved in terms of parental rights as foster care, and it is centered around student choice. So foster care students don't have a choice. So that's the summary of what it is. But we have kids in other programs that we operate, like our community schools program, that their story might as well be a story of somebody who had participated, but this program didn't exist. So the distinction is we have stories from kids that were 18 years old that were not housed and needed some extra supports. And so I think there's a way to tell the story, but I haven't started preparing yet to tell the story. So I'm a couple steps behind in terms of needing to catch back up, but I'm appreciative to be here and for it to be small and intimate. And as far as what I want to get out of it, just time and space to think through what I need to pull from where and weave together how, so that I can be more prepared as I start telling the story for Give Local
for us. I mean, it is on my calendar to get that done, of course, this month, so that we're all ready in November. And we did just tell our board about it, and we do have a this is the earliest ever, but we have a first pledged gift that's going to be a matching gift. So like, that was just amazing. I feel grateful for that. So that's where I am, and we are.
Thanks, Megan. Allison or Sana? I guess Allison, you're with the food bank too, right? You and Judy are working together.
Yep, Judy kind of filled in what I would say as well. I failed on the homework assignment in terms of actually having something to bring, but it's been a little bit nuts month for me. So I also am really looking forward to filling in that community together idea. I think a lot of what the food bank does is actually teaching kids and stuff. I don't know how many people are aware of that, but we have a lot of programs that are educational, garden programs and nutrition education programs, and all, I don't know, I think the people that come together in the community around those programs too, that's kind of a story that people don't know about. So beyond the kind of the obvious food bank mission of feeding the community, there's a whole lot of other cool things that go on, and maybe some of that can get woven in somehow too. I'm not sure, but I have been looking at kind of templates and ideas about storyboards and little fact sheets, and I'm really intrigued by pulling the idea of pulling some good ones of those together, maybe an overreaching one, a community to get committed, you know, that could be kind of touching on all of the food bank points, but then also some more specific ones relating to different programs. And I'm not sure how those fit in exactly with Give Local, but it was just kind of a really simple way, the storyboard idea, you know, with the kind of fact sheets, storyboards. I like the idea of pursuing those some more. So just kind of starting to fill those in my head, but we'll get there.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I'll go next. Yeah, my name is Sana. I use she, they pronouns, and I work at Pipe. I do Pipe's marketing, and I'm just kind of trying to learn more about how I can do a better job with a Give Local campaign. I actually had no idea about these workshops until my executive director told me like a few weeks ago, and I was like, what the heck? This is like the answer to most of my problems. And I signed up for literally every single one of them. So I'm very excited to be here. Didn't know there was playbacks, but I will definitely try and find the first one and listen to that one so I can kind of get caught up to speed. But yeah, so I'm just really trying to get more involved in figuring out how I can foster a better messaging online. And kind of, I forgot who said it. I think maybe it was Melissa or Elaine, not just like give us your money, but more of like, I don't remember what the wording was, but it was so on point. Kind of really fostering that sense of community and showing where the money is going and involving transparency and yeah. So sorry to ramble.
No, it's all related. And yeah, just I think Melissa was referring to sort of the relationship building piece. Is that right, Melissa? Yeah, that's a big part of fundraising for sure. Is it's really an ongoing relationship that we have with our donors. Yeah, and the storytelling piece can be a part of that relationship building. So the other day, I've been working with CLO, which is an organization here in town that serves the Latino community in a variety of ways. And we're doing a storytelling project together, collaborating. And where I did a little short training, they had gotten some volunteers and some clients together who wanted to interview each other. And so we did a little training, and I helped teach them how to, we recorded interviews with them. And one of the pairings was a donor and one of the clients who was directly helped through this donor. And it was a really powerful conversation between the two of them. And it's just another just another example of ways that we can sort of bring our donors in and continue to build that relationship with them through that sort of whole process. So yeah, I think it's very, very relationship centered. So it sounds like there's a mix of folks here who took the last training, who maybe weren't able to participate. And I just wanted to touch back on some key ideas and principles from that last workshop. And I'm wondering if the people who were able to attend, if you could share, not to put people too much on the spot, but if anybody wants to share a little bit about sort of some of their key, maybe the key takeaways that they, things that they took away from that they've been thinking about, any sort of new questions or ideas that have come up since that training based on some of the ideas that we talked about. Does anybody want to share? It's okay if not, but I wanted to give you all an opportunity. Judy?
So really, I got all kinds of information. I was taking mad notes. I'm old school, so I wrote it on a piece of paper. But it really, that's how I generate a lot of ideas. Is just kind of writing things down after I process. And you know, some of what I learned is even things like how long the story should be. So you know, in my notes, it's like it's a short story, 3 minutes or less, told from a personal or first person experience, and that you've got conventions when you think about, you know, I don't always think about true storytelling and what, you know, it's not, I don't think about it as if I'm writing a book to share with somebody, and really it sort of helped me recognize that the story still needs structure. It still needs a process. And so that was really helpful for me. Not that I've been able to fully realize that in my stories yet, but it was really good to understand that I really knew I do need to approach it from a different aspect. And so part of it for me is, you know, the pieces, the introduction, the characters, action, climax, you know, all of that. I need to keep that in mind when I'm telling a story. A lot of times I just talk and I share, but I need a little more structure. So those were some of my bigger takeaways. And then I started writing madly.
Great. Anyone else?
I want to go, even though I'm kind of hosting today, but we're also telling stories and, you know, working through our own, how are we presenting the bigger story of Give Local to the community? And so I have a story shape that I really like to use, which I'll touch on that in the October workshop that Melissa was talking about, the Fundraising for Humans. But I really loved taking Elaine's ideas from the first workshop here about translating our organizational values into questions and asking each other those questions. And then also connecting those more individual stories to the bigger story of a community trying to solve its own problems or create its own resilience. And so it really just layered over some ideas that I already really like to use for how to kind of shape the stories. And to the idea of zooming out and looking at the big picture of the community and not maybe just the individual struggle, but the big picture of what are we all working on together. I really loved that. And I loved the way that you tied it into the organizational values and turning those into questions. That's not something I had ever tried before, but it's been fun to kind of think about. So.
Great. Thanks, Daisha. Anyone else have things they want to share, takeaways?
I was also interested in the kind of the list of the pitfalls that might not be obvious right at the start, but the idea of presenting something as, you know, fixing a person instead of more of a community level, like Daisha was just saying, I think focusing on the community level, and not kind of like, I think it was expressed as decontextualizing an individual from a community, keeping it at the more broad community level. And I think Judy's prompt of, a community together, what was it? Let's see, a community committed, will help with that, not emphasizing transactions and gifts and things like that, but more to the bigger picture, the bigger fix.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think those are some of the biggest concepts, I think, in terms of trying to move away from, I think it's a very powerful American narrative, this idea of like pulling yourself up from your bootstraps and sort of this individualism. And I think if we can move our storytelling more out, like like as opposed to a portrait, more of a landscape. So really zooming out on the larger community and showing our interconnection, showing the ways in which we all need to show up and contribute. We all have a role to play. It might be slightly different depending on who we are, but we're all, and they're still leaders to things. We still need those folks too, but I think leadership can look different too. But I think that this idea of we're all, that there's lots of people involved that really make community change happen. And yeah, just moving away from the idea of sort of the individual victim and this sort of common trope, really, I guess, of the individual victim and the organization coming to sort of save the day, or the donor coming to save the day. And I think it's been very connected to sort of the donor-centric fundraising model. We need to care and nurture and appreciate and build relationships with our donors, but we need to be careful about those lines where we don't start saying that they're the heroes of our story. And so I think it's tricky. It's a tricky balance. But part of it is filling out the story of the people that we serve, to giving people the opportunity to share how, yes, this organization supported me here, and I also have my family and this support, and really just showing like the full picture of who these individuals are, I think, that we're working with and working alongside, really. So I think that's a lot of what I was hoping to communicate during that last workshop, is how, and one way of thinking about it is just, how do you zoom out? How do you widen the frame of your storytelling? And I love, the Thurston County Food Bank, what you said about, a community committed to. That's such a great way to start. And it's so easy to then tie that idea to the different, your different programs or your different principles, and then asking folks, for example, to, share a story around whatever it is that you want to emphasize, or multiple stories, So that's a really great example of how you could do that. You can show, the breadth and how robust your community is at Thurston County Food Bank. So I think that's a great overarching idea for your campaign. So those were some of the main ideas. I just want to look through my PowerPoint real quick and just see if there are other things that I wanted to just review with you real quick. The other point I wanted to just emphasize again is focusing on the relationship, and we've talked about this already, but thinking about the difference between kind of relational and transactional story. I mean, we can think about that in fundraising. I mean, like the Benavon model of fundraising, I suppose, is more relational, and then you have auctions and things like that maybe are more transactional, where you're kind of getting something in order to donate. But I think the same can be true for storytelling as well. And so thinking about the ongoing relationship you might have with the people who are sharing the stories, sharing their stories within your community, thinking about that as part of your ongoing relationship, rather than kind of dropping in and extracting a story. and then moving on from that individual, circling back, as you use that story, making sure you're getting back in touch with them. If you use it, like say you're using a story in Give Local and then you want to use it again a year from now, it's a good opportunity for you to reconnect with that person and say, hey, we want to use this story again. Here it is. And what do you think? Is this still relevant to your life? Because, again, people's lives change and their circumstances change, and the stories they might have shared a year ago may not be true anymore. Our lives and our relationships to our own stories evolve over time as well. So just thinking about it in that perspective too, that, what you capture, whether it's a video or whatever it might be at a certain period of time, a year later might not be relevant. And also it's just an opportunity to build that relationship with whoever it is that's sharing that story. So that's an important piece to consider with your storytelling, and just having that ongoing sort of feedback process with folks. And I think kind of in the oral history world, we call it ongoing consent. So, just this idea that we don't own anybody else's stories. They're sort of gifts that people give to us, maybe on loan for a certain period of time, and people can take them back at any point. So I guess thinking of ourselves more as stewards of other people's stories. Other people have referred to it as like story midwifery, if you want to get really sort of woo-woo about it, I guess. So those are a couple points that I wanted to just emphasize again. Let's see. We might come back to some of this. So let's get into a little bit more. We can do a little workshopping of your specific ideas. That's kind of what I was thinking we would spend most of our time doing, is helping you along your process. So some of you are further along than others in where you're at with your storytelling. So maybe this could be an opportunity for us to kind of get you to the next phase of where you're going with them. So does anybody want to volunteer to go first, and we can kind of all work together to help people move forward with their projects?
I'll go, but can you kind of like guide me on how to start? Because I'm new here.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about what you're hoping, like what are you hoping to fundraise? What's the emphasis of your fundraising for Give Local? Do you have that in mind?
Okay, so I haven't talked to, I'm sure it's going towards the work that we do with the houses community and the work that we do for people experiencing domestic violence. Like, for example, if you're experiencing DV, we'll buy you a hotel for the night and pay for your phone. So these are all things that we need funding for. And in addition to day-to-day operations, that's what I'm being told from the head. It trickles down. Do you think I need to get even more specific for messaging? Is that too sporadic?
Well, and Melissa and Daisha, you should feel free to chime in as well. My sense is I feel like it's, especially the way that things are moving right now. I mean, I think this is part of educating our donors too, but I think it's totally appropriate to try and to move more towards more general operations fundraising. And I think that there's ways to do that I don't know, can be compelling.
Right.
And I think one of the things is really thinking about the big picture of what you're doing. So what is the vision that you're trying to create in our community through PIPE? You have your mission, but you also have your vision. If the organization accomplished what it was setting out to do, what would our community look like? And engaging donors in that idea can be a powerful approach. So do you know, does PIPE have a vision? Do you know what your vision statement is?
Yeah, I can read to you our mission statement. So our mission statement is, PIPE's mission is to partner with houseless, street-dependent, and marginalized survivors to reduce harm, provide opportunities to heal from trauma, fight systemic oppression, and build lasting connections for our community.
Great. do you know if do you have beyond a mission statement? Does your organization have a vision statement by chance?
A
Do you-
vision statement. I don't think we have that.
Okay.
That sounds really evolved. I don't think we have that. I can ask someone, but I don't think we have. I
Yeah,
feel
no,
like if we had that, I would have known, because I've been working with them for 2 years now. I feel like someone at some point would have brought it up, right? I'll ask them.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we talked about at the last workshop, like what Daisha had referenced, was, thinking about your mission or sort of the core values that are driving your mission, and sort of turning those into questions that you can explore together as a community. So that's one approach, and thinking about, coming up with maybe a small number of questions. Maybe there's 3 or 4 questions, and then inviting, a broad variety of people from your community, board members, volunteers, people you're serving. Maybe there's other partners that you're engaging with. So that's one idea. And then, those questions can be answered pretty simply and then turned into short, testimonials or something that you can use on your website or your Facebook.
Can you give me
local campaign?
Like a really small example?
Yeah.
Oh, I think Megan just wrote it. Yeah. Can you say more about the values to questions or provide an example? Our values.
Yeah. So hang on a second. Let me pull up. Hang on just a sec. Let me just grab my old PowerPoint from last time.
Can I ask a follow-up about that while you're working on it? So if one of our organizational values is equity, would an open-ended question be like, what is equity? What would it look like if our community had equity? Or what would it look like if we had equity in education? Is that kind of where you're headed?
Yeah, I think that can work for sure.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Let me just bring up my PowerPoint for a second. What I was suggesting is sort of connecting. Can you all see this? Am I sharing okay? So connecting your work to a larger idea or question that your community can engage with or explore together. So this idea of sort of, turning your organizational values or principles into questions that sort of connect. Again, it's like zooming out, connecting to sort of the big picture of your work and conducting interviews with a wide variety of people in your community. And so one thought, I used to work at the Dispute Resolution Center, and a core principle or assumption from that organization is this idea that conflict, a lot of people are really afraid of conflict, but it's also can be an opportunity for personal learning and transformation. That just thinking about conflict as an opportunity is kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. And so some questions that you could explore with people is, what can conflict teach us about ourselves? How can conflict help us grow? And then getting more specific, which is more like story centered, is, do you remember a moment when your thoughts on conflict changed? So that kind of gets people in this place of like storytelling of like specific, that's like a really good beginning type of question. Do you remember a moment is a good way to start a question, because it gets people thinking about a specific story. So there's like the big picture types of questions that are more idea related questions that kind of get us in our head. And then the more heart-centered are the ones that are like thinking about a specific time or a specific person or a specific story. That was really a good example of what we're talking about. So that's one way of kind of working that idea of like turning a principle into questions that you can explore, and eliciting stories that sort of really emphasize those sort of core values or principles of your organization. The other example that I offered was, so my organization, we were doing a big community oral history and storytelling project around death and dying. And this was kind of pre-pandemic. And one of the core principles or assumptions of that project was there's really like no one sort of right way to die, that there's, people really need to be able to have agency at the end of their life. So just this idea of what does it mean to have agency at the end of your life? And so that was another way that we can kind of think about turning principles or assumptions into questions. So those are a few examples. I think that those are the two that I offered at my last workshop. Does that help a little bit?
Definitely. I feel like I have a lot more clarity.
Okay. Do you want to try doing one together? Do you guys want to work together on one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So does your organization have like a list of values or principles, core principles?
I feel I don't think we have that, or like I don't have access to that, but I know that we just have the mission statement.
Mm-hmm. Can you put the mission statement in the chat? It's kind of a long one.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. I'm gonna do that right now.
I definitely see values in your mission statement. I was just peeking at it online. So
Right. I feel like it's kind of like goes hand in hand, but like as far as like something that says our values, we don't have that. 1 second. I really appreciate your guys' patience.
No, it's good. This is kind of, I feel like a
Very impromptu. Here is...
Well, that's also, the joy of when we get smaller sessions like this. We can do more of this.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just reading this. So then I just put it in the chat. So I'm going to read it again. PIPE's mission is to partner with houseless, street dependent, and marginalized survivors to reduce harm, provide opportunities to heal from trauma, fight systemic oppression, and build lasting connections for our community. So when we read this, what kinds of values come out for you all?
I would say like heart-centered.
Justice comes out for me in that mission.
Definitely.
I think there's something in the partnering and connection that
Advocacy.
Partnering, connection, justice, advocacy.
Is that like the same? Is advocacy the same as partnering?
I don't really think of them as, I think they're interrelated, but I don't
Okay.
think the same. I think of partnering as kind of
PIPE.
Oh, go ahead, Megan.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think of partnering as bringing different things to the table to work on a larger thing together in a way.
I don't know what the words are, but I'll throw out a few. I see this concept of autonomy or self-determination and centering the client's voice. So instead of we have the solution for you, that notion of they get to choose. I see that in the partnership concept.
Yeah, and I think one of the themes, I think I saw this theme come out in some project recently that I thought was compelling, but this idea of sort of healing in community, what that looks like, what does it mean to heal in community? So I think, that could be a sort of a compelling thing to explore, because the healing of, I think there's there's lots of, there's just so much interconnection between, folks who are suffering and, unhoused right now, and the healing that happens within those communities in our larger community. And all the interdependence there, I think. So I think that could potentially be something to explore. Anything else?
Also,
Go ahead.
the one more piece that it is in there for me and in the science and data is LGBTQ folks experiencing higher rates of both houselessness and violence.
Mm-hmm. All right, so looks like Melissa put some other ideas in the chat around values.
Well, I
Thank
just
you
put
so much.
kind of what I was hearing people say,
Yeah.
what
Just
they were
for-
kind of
Thank
reading
you.
into the values out of
Yeah.
the mission statement from PIPE.
Does anybody want to take a crack at like taking one of those ideas or values and turning it into a question or two that you could ask somebody within the community, the PIPE community or the broader community, to elicit some stories?
I could take a crack at it. What does it mean to heal in partnership with community from violence?
Say that one more time.
What does it mean, or what does it look like to heal in partnership with community from violence? It's a little choppy.
Great. Anyone else want to offer an idea?
I don't know
For
if this-
me, yeah,
Go ahead. Is that Judy?
yeah, that was me.
Go ahead.
For me, it's even conceptually, because I always pare it down to what's the phrase, and it's how do you provide safety with no roof? You know, you're talking about providing services to people who are unsheltered. It's like, how do you shelter people without a roof? And so for me, it's sort of that concept, because I'm a visual, so I'm like, okay, there's no roof. How do we do that? So that's where I would go with that.
Mm-hmm. I think about sidewalk. I feel like there's just this idea of everyone deserves a safe place to call home.
Well, Daisha, I think you were gonna say something too, right?
Yeah, go ahead,
You want to
Daisha.
share that?
I was just thinking about that connection between justice and community healing, and what is the role of justice in healing our community. To me, those values just feel tied, and I don't know if that helps with storytelling or fundraising, but I think it's an interesting question that gets at those values.
Yeah, those are all great questions. I mean, I think if you wanted to engage with some, like a client that you served who wants to share their own story with PIPE and the impact that it's had on their lives, I think what I would suggest is like thinking about the partnership, emphasizing the partnership piece. So like thinking about PIPE being one piece of like a larger network of support. So how can you get that person to sort of draw out other supports, so you can see how PIPE is a part of a larger community that's working together to heal. So that would be another thought for you when you work with individuals, thinking about it in that way. And I think I had one other thought, and it slipped my mind. Yeah, and I think just in general, like when we're working with individuals, also just emphasizing like assets over deficits. So if we're wanting to sort of focus on some clients as well, just thinking about how can we yeah, just show a fuller picture of who that person is and their inherent strengths, as opposed to, the deficits. And if we want to show the challenges that people are encountering, like really asking and engaging with questions around systems and like things that are like barriers, and how people have been struggling to kind of get past certain barriers within systems, so that we're not focusing on kind of individual, unintentionally possibly like falling into a trap of like blaming an individual, rather than kind of, again, like broadening the lens out to sort of think about the larger systems that are really, a lot of times what's challenging for folks. So that's another thought when you're working with individuals as well.
I just wanted to, oh, sorry.
No,
I
you
was-
go.
This last bit of the conversation just made me think that at the food bank, we have a potential wonderful person to interview. There is a daily volunteer who's been doing it for years, who lives in his truck at the mission right next door, and he's amazing. And he's like, friends with all of us there, and extremely friendly and talkative. And he's got, I don't even know what his whole story is, because I haven't been around downtown food bank for a while, I mean, on a regular basis. But I feel like Sean could potentially be a really interesting person to interview or talk to, because he's an integral part of the food bank. I mean, I'd like to see people like that on our board. Somebody who's a client, who is a volunteer, who is absolutely integral to the service and to what we do. And I think that voices like his be really impactful on many levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I haven't thought this through, but it just occurred to me up for it. Wouldn't be someone we'd have to, we wouldn't want to cajole anyone anyway. It would have to be something they would be comfortable with. But it's just an idea, because he might have all kinds of stories and angles, and posing questions to Sean could be really interesting and useful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think, when I think about, nonprofit storytelling and the potential, I mean, I think about like a mosaic of voices, and thinking about like, how can we share with the larger community who our community is, in a way that's really reflects the character and the diversity of the whole community. So rather than putting like one story up on the screen to like, I feel like when I first started fundraising, it was like this idea of like, you have to make people cry 3 times during the event or something, And so like, how can you, instead of, which you want to connect with people's, you want to make that heart connection, but like, how can you show just a really, show the complexity and the nuance within your community? It's not all one voice. There's lots of people, and people come from all sorts of different perspectives and backgrounds, and have all sorts of different motivations. So I think we can still keep our story short, with maybe more of the focus being on showing the complexity and the breadth of our communities, rather than focusing on just that one individual for that one particular campaign. But thinking about maybe as a long-term effort. I mean, thinking about following like a template, whatever works for you, and starting to really grow your stories, so that people, when they visit your website, see like, wow, there's like this whole big community of people, and look at how diverse it is, and all these different people come to the food bank for all these different reasons. So I think that's one of the benefits I see, is just really giving people a broad view of who this community is, and how it takes so many people, really. I mean, we all know that in theory, but it's interesting to sort of delve into that, in practice. Sana, do you feel like we gave you enough of a seed to begin with, or do you want?
You gave me a whole plant. I don't know about a seed. I've got a garden. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I was typing away. I've got so many ideas. I really, really appreciate. I mean, even in this workshop, community came together to help a bigger mission to help me help people who need PIPES advocacy. So I really appreciate you guys all coming together to really help me tell the story of this organization. So thank you guys so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I think I would also just say that that, keeping things simple, there's nothing wrong with keeping things simple, and recognizing that especially when we're working with clients, that they have, all of us have long, complex histories, and it's impossible to tell somebody's story in a short period of time. So I think accepting that and then deciding some small little bits, like we talked about this last time, it's what's the gift from this person that we can put out into the world? What can we glean from this person's amazing life experience that we can gift our community with? So really focusing in on, just a few questions. I was working with a volunteer. We're doing an oral history project, and one of my volunteers interviewed Nat and Thelma Jackson, who are pretty noteworthy people in town. They've been here a long time. They've been interviewed quite a lot. They've had, they're in their, I think, late 70s at this point. So they've had, this rich, amazing life. And it's our stories are 10 minutes long. So it's really about, bits of wisdom from them. This person who interviewed them really asked them 2 questions. It was and it was all around the theme of seeding the future, planting seeds and then cultivating them, and what it takes to do that over a long period of time. So we're not, trying to provide a chronology about first they lived here and then they did this. And, because when you get into it, sometimes it's challenging because, people do really amazing things that are so complex, and to tell a story about that is challenging. So what little bits of wisdom can you put out into the world? So that's kind of a side note, but I wanted to just emphasize simple is great. Does anybody else want to workshop an idea?
I would love to.
Okay.
I've already gotten so much out of this that I have a story that we haven't released yet that I'm I got to rework that because there's really an opportunity to tell the richer picture of all of the resources, because we actually do have a quote from the client that we have permission to use, but the client in the quote really centers the staff person and the organization as the hero, which, we are working to move away from saviorism and donor-centric or even org-centric fundraising, right? So I don't want to change that person's words, but I think there's a way to, I got to work on that. I got to figure that one out. But
It's hard.
whether we dive into that part or whether we look at the mission, vision, values, I loved helping Sana and Pipe, and I would love your guys' brain trust on ways that I could frame questions based on our mission, vision, values. Our mission is to advance the health and well-being of all young people. And our vision is that all young people are supported, healthy, safe, and valued. And our values are equity, community, and systems change.
Okay. So I just put the mission and vision in the chat. Let me just re-put that. I'm just trying to find your values again. Did you put your values there already?
I did. They're way up. One of the first comments I made, I think. Yeah, our values are equity, community, and systems change. And we just changed one of our values. It used to be equity, community mobilization, and systems change. And community mobilization is not an accessible concept. And community is in our name together, and it has always been a part of who we are.
Okay. Well, feel free if anybody, I'm just thinking for a minute, but if anybody has thoughts about questions that could be related to really bring out the vision or the mission, the values,
And while people are thinking about that, there's also a follow-up question from Sana about, are there any, I'm thinking it might have been directed at you, Elaine, but it says, are there any nonprofits whose online messaging you deem as a good inspiration? Maybe like a good Instagram or website to look at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'd have to think about that a little bit. I think I feel like Sidewalk has always been pretty good at coming up with really simple messaging that I think relates across the community. Their campaigns, I think, I've noticed anyway, in terms of like local, local organizations. A way to sort of engage with this idea of like, what it means to have a home, really, and I think, I really do love this idea of a community committed to. I think that's a really great idea. It's something that people can really wrap their heads around. I think we all feel committed to community. I think every single person does. They define that differently, and they may show up in different ways. But I think things that can stretch across communities, across political lines, all of that stuff. I think the more kind of focused on just what makes us connected as human beings, I think is helpful. But I'll think more about that, and I can send some ideas too, and following up some websites.
Thanks. Just to kind of bring us back, we're kind of thinking about like together and your mission, vision, values and stuff. I was personally thinking, I was like kind of like combining some of the words and stuff like that. And like a question could be, how do you create systemic change together?
Good one. My thought was, you could interview some youth. I know there's some challenges with sharing youth stories, but just thinking about this idea of like having people think about, or even grownups too, like thinking about moments where they felt supported, a moment where you felt safe, when you felt valued. You could like connect it to, a person that really supported you in some way, or and then I think the challenge there would be like figuring out a way to sort of make sure that you're asking questions where, you can kind of emphasize those partnerships or show the larger context. So again, kind of trying to get away from that, savior, like this person saved my life kind of thing. But just, I think those moments, thinking about specific stories can be really powerful. Just thinking about that vision statement. I'll just put that in the chat.
So if you were starting an interview, just right, pertaining to what you just said, if you were starting an interview with a youth, let's say, or a client or somebody, and you really didn't want the answer to be that, so-and-so saved me, the savior complex thing, how would you pose the question so that it kind of gets around that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that we recently did, there was an interview with a person that was assaulted in downtown Olympia, and kind of their experience kind of overcoming that, the initial trauma, and then what happened in order to kind of get to the other side of that. And I think, the organization that supported him played a big role in that, but he did mention other people and other organizations and other things. And so part of it is getting away from like wanting to focus only on your organization and follow up all your questions about your organization, and making sure that you're also asking, tell me more about how, for example, the Olympia Police Department supported you, like, and so that you're fleshing out that story beyond just your organization. So like avoiding the temptation, like you want to tell more about like what your organization did, but also picking up on, the the other groups that supported that individual and allowing them to like share more so they can see the whole big picture and see how like a community, you know, when there's something big that happens, you know, multiple people have to come out and we all play a different role. And maybe your organization's at the center of that role, but there's still these other things going on too that support. So I think just picking up on that and also being intentional. One thing that's helpful is doing some kind of like pre-interview work with somebody. So rather than like, you know, having all your questions and then getting together with somebody and recording right away, you might want to have like an unrecorded informal conversation with that person where you review, you know, just get a better sense of who they are and their relationship to the organization. If you want to explore a specific event, like then, you know, explore some of that with them ahead of time. And that will really help you then further decide in a recorded situation what you really need to emphasize and ask of that person. So I found that that's super helpful, especially if it's somebody that you don't know very well. And it also just allows you to answer questions and build a relationship and rapport with that person. And some people get nervous, you know, like being recorded right off the bat. So I would really recommend, especially if you're using personal stories, to use that approach. And then you could, you know, it also gives you an opportunity. Oh, you found out this other information that's outside of your organization, and you could follow up and find out some more about, you know, the other group that kind of supported whatever happened. Does that help a little bit? Allison, you're muted.
I was unmuted and then I just muted myself. And then is it, you know, you get a whole bunch of material, and if there's a lot of good conversation around community and interactions with various organizations and such, and then is it okay to just edit out parts that might, you know, be too savor conflict? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you can. I think you can. Yeah, I think you need to be thoughtful about what you wind up using in the end, and you might, you know, I think you might find it's amazing how long conversations can potentially last. I mean, if you actually wind up wanting to do an interview as opposed to just kind of like send a question out to somebody to like answer in a written response or something, you know, it might be a 40-50 minute conversation. So you have to be really thoughtful about how you're then, what you're taking from that and how you're creating a narrative from it. And what I tend to do is I try to like read the transcript from that interview, you know, it might be 10 pages long, and look for the part that is like, this is what this is about. Like, what's the essence of what this person is saying? You know what I mean? And really like build the rest of your story around that. So, yeah, and I think it sort of jumps out at you. There might be like 2 or 3 phrases or like ideas, but I think that that's really helped me. And then it helps you kind of decide what to get rid of. And I think it's tricky because I think people do really want to show their appreciation for the organizations. I mean, I think that's true. And you don't want to take that away from people either. And so, but I think it's just, so, I mean, another question that we asked in the interview with this person who was assaulted was, you know, where they go to find their strength, you know, and I gave them an opportunity to talk about their daughter, you know, I mean, it's totally unrelated to the organization. So like, I think there's ways that you can, the kinds of questions you can ask that really get at just the larger human sitting in front of you that's beyond your organization, right? So so I think there's that too. But the editing process is interesting. It's fun, but it's challenging. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Megan, I don't know, how do we do? Do we want to talk more about your?
I definitely have some nuggets I can use. If other folks have ideas, that's great. And I feel like I have a good start.
Okay. I'm just gonna scroll up and see your mission. Does anybody else have anything to add for Megan? I mean, one thing that occurs to me is just, I mean, you could do something that's around when you use the phrase sort of educational justice. Like, what does that really mean? You know what I mean? Like on a practical level, on a day-to-day level, like what are some of the things that we encounter that keep students from getting where they need to go? So I think sometimes like our values, our principles can be these big ideas that maybe we need to provide more specific examples for on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's good sort of context and big picture thinking to help people understand the system. So as part of it is like thinking about doing some like storytelling about systems, which is less about an individual, you know what I mean? But I think is really important.
Question follow-up about that. I do agree that some storytelling about systems and making the language accessible, I think for people that work in education or social justice, that's like less of a foreign concept, but for the general public, that is a foreign concept. And so my question is, the question words that you started with, were you saying that more rhetorically for me or us to like chew on, or were you suggesting that as an interview question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it just stuck out to me as something that could be just something that could be a story could be built kind of around that. You know, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis to like experience injustice in that, like an educational environment? You know, like what are those? What does that mean for a student?
Yeah, when you were talking about that, Elaine, what kind of came to mind for me was like having like a short like talking point list where it's, you know, something about like, you know, 3 ways that youth experience that, you know, we've heard, you know, youth have told us they've experienced educational injustices is, you know, 1, 2, and 3 and stuff like that. Or doing the reverse, you know, like 3 things people do every day to promote better, you know, to promote educational justice for youth is X, Y, and Z.
Can I ask, do your youth, sorry, I used to work at the Thurston County Juvenile Center for the aftercare program, and my youth like never talked about stuff like that ever. It was always like fun stuff like TikTok or a joke. It was never like real talk. Like do they talk to you about stuff like that? Because I'm just wondering, like these prompts might be like really intense for them.
Right.
Because in my experience, it's really hard for them to open up.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think it would be only certain students where there's a real relationship built where we could have conversations like this. And it has to do too with how much a young person is in crisis in that moment or not, and how much they're able to see themselves as part of a system too. Because, you know, there's some probably developmental thought pieces about that, but also, you know, some people are able to, in the world, are able to better label injustice when they see it and experience it than others, right? We're just at different points on the continuum of being able to do that. So I do think changing the language, but if we had the trust and rapport and that safe relationship and asked, especially probably some students of color, you know, perhaps have our staff of color have that conversation with them.
Right.
I think they would say a lot of things.
Right. I feel like it's really making the language digestible. Like you said, like I have seen them talk, but if it's one-on-one, it's never in a group. And it's always POC to POC, just exactly as you mentioned, but kind of refraining that verbiage. Cause I feel like everything we've said in the chat is like great for us, but honestly, I don't, for the youths.
I just thought of my daughter when she was in college did a I thought, a really cool project on casual discrimination. And rather than interviewing or talking to anybody, she set up a visual thing and people just put literally sticky notes all over this freaking wall of, you know, ways that people said things that they didn't even consider discrimination, that was incredibly hurtful and discriminating. I mean, I'll just think about, you know, an example is like, are you sure you're Japanese? Things like that, you know, that people say to people all the time and don't even realize they're being discriminatory. So people put up a whole pile of sticky notes, and I don't know, maybe just something like that could be a way to get people to not, you know, not have to interview people, or especially youth, if they don't feel like talking about stuff. Like, just have a place where they can post an anonymous little experience, or I don't know, just a thought.
I think that's a great idea. Maybe a room for kind of doing both. Maybe like a group project where you can do like yes or no questions and gather statistics and data, and then use that to clear your messaging. And then with the people that you feel like have built relationships with certain staff members, maybe facilitating that dialogue.
I love that too, because it sort of emphasizes that, you know, this is about community engagement over the long term. And so I think sometimes, and I know that this happens to me as well, you know, just, you know, as I think about the oral history projects that we're doing, and the, you know, it's going to turn into an exhibit, and we need these products. So there's the process, and then there's the products. And the process, like, don't underestimate the value of the process, you know, whatever that process might be, whether it's like what you said, like sticky notes, or it's a facilitated group conversation. I mean, we need these products because we need to be able to like reach a larger audience, kind of, you know, whether it's on our website or Facebook page or at a big event, we need a video, whatever it might be. But like, also think about your process, you know, like, because, you know, for example, like hiring a production company produces a great product, but what's the process there? Like, what's the benefit of that process? And so thinking about like that part of it, you know, how can you build a participatory process to create products that you also can use? It's challenging, and it requires a commitment on your volunteers and your staff because it's more time intensive, but I think it can be really powerful. And I think one example too, like in this project that we've been working on with Cielo, I mean, part of it is like giving people the opportunity to interview each other. So like oftentimes we're interviewing clients and we're asking them all the questions. Well, they have questions too, you know, and so this gives them an opportunity to like ask back and be like, you know, and then you show it as an equal relationship in that way. And then the stories are like a conversation between these two people who are in relationship with each other, as opposed to just the story of the person itself that we've been serving, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, that's just one small example. I think there's lots of ways that we can do that, but I think what I want to emphasize is that, like, think about those both as two things, product and process, and they're both really valuable to you. Yes, we're at the 10-minute mark. So just a few minutes. This has been a great conversation so far. Does anybody from Allison or Judy, do you want to do anything in the last few minutes around your work at the food bank? Questions you might have? You've sort of been addressing things as we go.
So I just wanted to maybe work through one little idea. There are a whole lot swirling, but it was one of my original ideas. So I just want to see if this flows and if there's any additional input, which I would absolutely welcome. It begins with sort of my foundation for all the prompting questions and images is really about what kind of story I'm telling, and I'm trying to tell the story of who we are, what we provide, how we do it, why we do it, and then a little bit about who the food bank is as an organization. And so one of those, we've got our core philosophies. One of those philosophies is prioritizing children. My question and my prompt to incorporate that philosophy and to include, I don't know where I put my kids, but was, what does it feel like to be hungry? And what I would like to do is interview kids that we work with. We're in school gardens, we're doing nutrition education. We have children who are getting the weekend meal bags. We've got children who are in line with their families getting food. So it's asking the question, what does it really feel like to be hungry? And putting that in quotations, maybe with no names. I'm not really interested in names, but it could be third grader, second grader, ninth grader, whatever, but just to sort of talk about the variety. And then I wanted to just speak to how it's a priority for us in the programs that we provide, because 49% of those we serve are children. So it really is we have sort of become the voice of those that typically go unheard, which are children. And so I'm not really sure where to take that, except just as I was listening and processing, I thought about, I had that question, maybe working in the quotes as you talked about interviews. That would be, very short and brief, but really, what does it feel like to be hungry, or somehow get some interesting responses from kids, and then talk about that on our platform a little bit. So I'll open it up for some.
One thing that comes to mind, Judy, when you say that is thinking about the importance of food to our community and cultural life, and particularly food traditions. And I wonder if rather than focusing on sort of the hunger aspect of it, like what you could kind of turn it around and talk about with kids, their favorite food traditions, or like things that their parents make that they love, or like something that's more of that sort of more emphasizes the family and culture and community that they're a part of, and how the food bank is supporting cultural resilience in a way. I mean, I think access to food also means being able to strengthen our own